千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I want to extend my welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we are ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Let me provide a quick recap before continuing with the introduction. The very first thing we did was to talk about the proper title translation for Tao Te Jing. At the bottom of the slide, as you can see, there is also a table that explains the difference in spelling. Why is it that we sometimes see Tao Te Jing spelled with T and CH? Other times, we see the alternative spelling with the D and J. And the results, this is because they are the result of different romanization systems, as you can see in the table. So the different spelling are not meant to sound differently. They're supposed to sound the same. Before we get to that, I also want to point out that we have here in this slide the simplest and what I would offer as the most accurate translation of the title. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I hear someone, anyone, make a claim like that, like, this is the way, this is the way to go, this is the way to translate, I become instantly wary. Shields up. How can they make that statement? But on the other hand, if they're able to then back it up with reasons, with evidence, with proof, then I like to think that I will maintain an open mind to listen to that and perhaps be receptive to it. So last time, the fundamental thing that we did together was to get clarity on the title. We broke it down into the 3 characters. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that. The first character is simply the Tao. The second character, simply virtue. And the last character, simply classic. And there are specific reasons for choosing those words as the closest possible English equivalent. So the many variations out there, they are, in my opinion, unnecessarily complex. What we're dealing with is simplicity itself. It is the Tao and Virtue Classic. Now, continuing on, I also wanted to address another common question, and that is, what is the reason for the different spelling? I mentioned that it's the different romanization system. So last time, I went into the details. I talked about the very first romanization system that was devised about a century ago. So at the time, and for many decades, it was the only system available. In that system, it mandated the T spelling for a D sound. So I have that encircled in red in this particular chart. That system spoke of unaspirated and aspirated sounds, terms that would be useful to linguists, but rules that were never explained to people outside of academia. So it didn't matter if you spoke both English and Chinese fluently, one would still not understand the reasoning for the rules unless one specifically received instructions for that. This caused a lot of confusion. It's not just the title Dao De Jing. The people who study Chinese eventually, or sometimes very quickly, figure out that when we say Kung Fu, well, the original is actually Gong Fu. The original is a G sound, not a K sound. And the difference is, again, because of the romanization system. Same thing with everyday items like tofu. We say tofu, it's actually doufu with the D sound. So complexities arising out of these rules that were not absolutely necessary, but ended up being confusing. And therefore, a new system replacing the old, the pinyin system of romanization, tries to make it sound the way it looks. And that's how we have the D spelling for Dao De Jing. Even when it's spelled with a T and CH, it is still supposed to sound like Dao De Jing. The sound doesn't change. So for more details, I will refer everyone to the recording from our last session. Moving on, we also talked about Lao Tzu. Who was he? And also noting that the name Lao Tzu could be romanized in two different ways as well. The first character is romanized the same way, Lao, in both the old system and the new. Zi, the character meaning master, the honorific, is spelled differently depending on the system. I've used the old system in my books because that's the tradition. That's what, for the last century or so, that is what people have been using. So I wanted to stick with that as to not cause a lot of confusion. In the future, though, the world is probably moving on to the pinyin system. Last time, we talked about who Lao Tzu was. He was a scholar. He was not just any scholar of his time, but the most knowledgeable, the most prominent scholar, which was the reason why he was able to serve as the royal archivist for the king. The king, the emperor of the Zhou Cao, the Zhou dynasty. So this was not a trivial achievement, far from it. This was one of the highest possible positions that one could get as a scholar. Lao Tzu loved to teach or share the teachings of the Tao. He was known for that. He was legendary for that. And Confucius, who was a much younger man compared to Lao Tzu, specifically sought him out to learn from him, became his student. And legend also has it that even after Lao Tzu left his position as the royal archivist, essentially like the librarian for the emperor, he continued to teach, continued to share the Tao. It was what he knew, it was what he loved. And finally, Lao Tzu, the sage. It is important to note that in the Tao Te Ching, penned by Lao Tzu, he talked a lot about the ancient sages, about the greatness, the wisdom of these ancient ones. He never once talked about himself as a sage. he did talk about himself trying to learn and emulate from the ancient sages. He talked about how, in the process of that, his own cultivation made him very different from most people, where most people loved big crowds and noisy activities. He preferred quiet solitude, where people were exacting, scrutinizing, shrewd in everyday calculations, trying to gain an advantage. Lao Tzu pointed out that he didn't care about all that. He would appear to others as being rather obtuse, rather dumb, not really with the program, not really looking out for himself. But that was because he was detached from materialistic competition. He was detached from the rat race, even back then, trying to gain some kind of material advantage. He was much, much more focused on cultivating contentment, joy, happiness. Because of this, a master who did not see himself as a master, a sage who did not proclaim himself as a sage, he was considered to be the foremost sage of his time. Zhuangzi, another sage in the Tao tradition who came after Lao Tzu, roughly a century after, of course, never had the opportunity to meet Lao Tzu in person. Nevertheless, Zhuangzi learned from the recorded teachings of Lao Tzu, learned from the Dao De Jing, and considered himself to be a disciple of Lao Tzu as well. In his writings, in his stories, Zhuangzi described Lao Tzu as the foremost sage of his time. So it is the three different attributes of Lao Tzu that I wanted to highlight for everyone last time: the scholar, the teacher, and the sage. This is where we ended up, and this is where we pick up and continue for today. When we talk about the basics, when we talk about the introductory fundamentals, it is also important for us to have some clarity on exactly what the Tao is. Now, we have seen that the Tao is simply a Chinese character meaning the path or the way. Of course, the meaning of the word Tao has been expanded way beyond just the path and the way. There are, all told, three primary layers of meaning in the Tao Te Ching itself. It describes the Tao in distinctively three different ways. One, there are multiple references in the Tao Te Ching describing the Tao itself as the universal source of creation. This is because the ancient sages looked around and they saw all around them continuous, never-ending process of creation unfolding all the time. Anything and everything, from the passing of seasons, from the growth of plants, the birth of animals and human beings, they saw that the entire world is continuing to create every minute of every day. Therefore, it most certainly was the way of existence to create. And because of that, because of this continuous creation, they realized that you can wind back the clock. You can go back in time to see the source that begets a particular effect. and then the source before that, the source before that, and so on. Everything traces back to some kind of ultimate source. The ancients did not pretend that they knew what that source was, but because creation seemed to be the way of the universe, they called it the way or the Tao. So that was number one. That was the one way that they depict and describe the Tao in the Tao Te Ching. Number two, the natural laws governing everything. So the ancients had not yet worked out all the natural laws. They could see that there was some kind of principles, some sort of laws that everything was following. And this included what they observed in the night sky with the stars. They could see a certain repeating pattern with the sunrise, sunset, position of the sun in the sky. Ditto the moon. The sun and the moon seem to follow different rules, but they're consistent. They're repeating the same patterns all the time. The sun, a daily repetition, and then with seasonal variations. It would encircle the sky in different parts of the sky, depending on the season that one was in. The moon showed different phases, and this process would repeat itself month after month. And therefore, there must be something behind that, some kind of principle behind it. They call that the Tao. It is whatever moves heaven and earth, the sun and the moon, not to mention all the stars. More down to earth, the Tao is described as what's moving, powering, motivating, sustaining the myriad things, all the living things. All the living things in the world, including human beings. And by extension, the way that human beings interact with one another. So in terms of movement, trends of societies. Number three, in the Tao Te Ching, the Tao is also described as the highest aspiration of human beings, that the highest level, the ultimate level of virtue is to be naturally good, like the Tao. Therefore, the Tao represents spiritual truths in the heart that one should follow. It represents the realm of perfection in virtues. So as we cultivate, as we practice the virtues on a daily basis, we get ever closer to the Tao. So these are the three layers of meaning in the Tao Te Ching when answering the question, what is the Tao? There is no simple answer that can completely respond to the question. It is the three different elements that we see here, plus the simple original definitions that we talked about last time. So these ideas about the Tao, the motivating factor of the stars, the planets, human beings, human societies, living things, plants, animals, everything. These ideas, when did they originate? Where did they come from? I want to dig into that a little bit and perhaps take the opportunity to dispel some misinformation or misconceptions. What is the origin of Tao philosophy? I've got two columns here. I have widespread misconception, and then I have the real origin of the Tao. Two columns. And the graphic that you see here is Lao Tzu painted, depicted as riding his oxen. The misconceptions that I want to address are still in various sources of information today. So I think it's a good idea for me to touch on them as a way to protect people from misinformation, that when they see it, when they come across misconceptions, they will recognize it and then recall to mind what we're talking about here today and have the correct information instead. So one misconception is that Taoism originated during the Warring Stage period 2,500 years ago, because that was when Lao Tzu lived. So this is like saying that Taoism originated with Lao Tzu 2,500 years ago. This is still something that you will read about in some encyclopedias and online sources that purport to be authoritative. But the actual origin of the Tao goes far back in time, much further back in time. It actually originated in prehistoric China at least 5,000 years ago. So the true origin of the Tao is at least as ancient to Lao Tzu himself as he is to us. When we go back in time to his time, we time travel 2,500 years. Lao Tzu will have to time travel 2,500 years to get to something resembling the beginning of the Tao. So the Tao is incredibly ancient. When people describe the Tao as New Age, in my mind, I think, well, actually, it's old age, very old. 2,500 years don't even describe the age of the Tao. More like 5,000, possibly older, possibly much older. It's just that anything before 5,000 years is lost in the midst of history for the simple reason that there were no written records being kept prior to that time. So the other misconception was about the Tao Te Ching was written 2,500 years ago, which is correct, serves as the source text. Well, people think of the Tao Te Ching as sort of like the Bible of Taoism, but that is because that's what they know. In reality, there are other books about the Tao written long before the Tao Te Ching. The most prominent example is the I Ching, and people call it the Book of Changes, but it's more accurately translated as the Classic of Changes, or the Change Classic is a good translation for I Ching. And please note, when I say I Ching, that is the way it is pronounced. It is also the way people are supposed to pronounce it using the Wade-Giles romanization system. It is not I Ching, it is not I Ching, it's I Jing. It predated the Tao Te Ching by at least 2,000 years. And if there's anything that should be pointed to as the source text or the original text, it will be more the I Ching than the Tao Te Ching, just because it's been around for 2,000 years at least before the Tao Te Ching was written. Lastly, Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching and became the founder of Taoism. If one were to search on founder of Taoism, oftentimes one will land on Lao Tzu. And this is also not quite accurate, because Lao Tzu actually did not originate or found anything. He was not the founder of Tao Te Ching or Taoism or Tao philosophy. He wrote the Tao Te Ching And in the Tao Te Ching itself, he referred to the ancient times. He talked about antiquity, ancient masters. When you count them up together, he talked about it 10 different times in various chapters of the Tao Te Ching. He was very clear in recognizing the contribution of the ancient sages who came before him. He was pointing out that he was learning from the ancient masters. So he was not the founder. He was not the originator. The concepts in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu was able to summarize from many different books about the Tao. Most of the books that Lao Tzu had access to had been lost in history. We have no idea what they actually said. They had been destroyed. He was able to summarize them, giving us a glimpse back to the past that was thousands of years before his time. So, bottom line, Lao Tzu summarized Tao concepts into the Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching was a summary. He was not the founder. He was someone who created the Tao Te Ching as a simple, easy, quick way for people to absorb a lot of different Tao concepts from many, many different books. And in the writing of the Tao Te Ching, there is a legend associated with that. And I want to share that legend with you about how the Tao Te Ching was written. The story took place, of course, 2,500 years ago during the Warring Stage period. It took place at a setting called the Hangu Pass, Hangu Guan. The image that you see here is taken from the actual pass. The characters that you see there is from right to left, whereas in this slide presentation, the Chinese that you have seen is written from left to right. Both orders are okay, are usable. It doesn't need to follow one direction or the other, but I wanted to make sure everyone knew. So let's go to Hangu Guan, the Hangu Pass. 2,500 years ago, it was a typical day at the Hangu Pass, with no more or less than the usual traffic passing through. There were people leaving or entering the kingdom. Yin Xi, the commander of the pass, looked over the travelers with watchful eyes. He was especially careful because recently he heard news that war was coming. That gave him reason to be especially alert. The commander saw an old man riding an ox and approaching slowly. He sensed something different about this old man. He followed this intuition. He walked up to the old man and he raised a hand to halt. He said, "What is your name?" Unlike most of the people the commander dealt with, the old man had a perfectly composed demeanor. The old man was not pompous, nor was he ingratiating. He said, "I am Li Er." The name rang a bell for the commander of the pass. He suddenly realized what his intuition was telling him. He said, "Are you not the one they call Lao Tzu, the old master?" The old man's expression showed a flicker of reluctance because he did not wish to draw attention to himself. He nodded. Yes. This is a great honor. The commander was overjoyed. He bowed deeply. He said, I'm a student of the Tao. And I hear people say that you teach the Tao with divinely inspired powers. Lao Tzu smiled at this and said, Commander, let us not be too hasty in believing what people say. The commander said, You must have tea with me, master, before you resume your journey. I insist. Lao Tzu saw the sincerity in this invitation and gladly accepted. They went into the office of the pass. The commander said, Master, I am most curious about how you gained your legendary wisdom. He made small talk as he boiled water for tea. Lao Tzu said, I claim no wisdom whatsoever. Others may get that impression only because I have served as the king's royal archivist over the years. Yes, the commander said. You won the position due to your ability to remember and summarize all the books you have ever read. You must possess incredible knowledge. Lao Tzu said, the Tao is not about pursuing knowledge. It is about returning to simplicity. There are certainly many books in the royal archives. Those books by themselves have no power to capture the essence of the Tao. The commander tried to imagine many books, found that he could not. He said, Master, I find it difficult to even imagine all these books in one place. Only a king can amass such a collection. I am lucky if I see just one book. A library of books, that would be beyond my comprehension. Lao Tzu said, books are dead things, Commander. They contain the words of people long gone. The only way to gain living wisdom from dead books is by applying their words to your life. So the commander nodded. Yes, master. Nevertheless, I suspect there are many scholars who desire unlimited access to the books for themselves, like you have. Surely they wish to oust you from your position in order to take over? Lao Tzu said, yes, that is true. The position may seem like one of prestige, but in fact, it can be one of danger. Then the commander said, Master, you have survived all these years and thrived as the royal archivist. What is your secret? Lao Tzu said, there is no secret. I use the Tao. Anyone can do the same thing. Avoid danger and enjoy peace just by diligent cultivation of the Tao. As they were talking, the hot tea was poured into 2 cups. The commander said, well, in that case, you should be able to maintain his position for many years to come. Lao Tzu said, no, my work for the king is done. I can retire. Things being the way they are right now, I see no reason to remain. And this was the first indication that the commander had that Lao Tzu was not just traveling, he was actually leaving everything behind. He said, Master, I envy your freedom. I hear about the impending war as well. and I'm thinking about going away, but I'm tied to my property and career. Lao Tzu said, such is the nature of desires and attachments. What you desire tends to bind you. Letting go of the desire tends to free you. Lao Tzu sat back and sipped his tea. The commander shook his head. It is a pity, master, that you are leaving, because I myself and many others can learn much from you. Then an idea occurred to him. Master, would you consider writing down some notes for us so we can cultivate the Tao on our own? That is an excellent idea, Lao Tzu said. I can write down summaries of all the major works in the Royal Archives. I can also include the advice that I have given the king over the years, because that advice was based on the Tao as well. This was a little puzzling to the commander. He said, would such advice apply to me, master? After all, I am no king. But Lao Tzu said, certainly, it applies. The scope may change, but the Tao remains the same, no matter who you are. Royalty or commoner, it makes no difference to the Tao. So upon that agreement to share his vast knowledge, Lao Tzu began to work. He leveraged his incredible memory and understanding to create one concise chapter after another. Each chapter was a highly refined and condensed distillation of a major principle, a notable book, or a discussion with the king. Finally, after many hours, it was done. Lao Tzu gave the commander the manuscript. Bamboo slips. The commander could not believe it. What he held in his hands was the private library of a king condensed into a very compact form. It was as if Lao Tzu had squeezed all the treasures in the royal vault into a diamond and handed it over to him. Lao Tzu said farewell, mounted the ox to continue on his way. The commander called out after him, Master, Master, how can I thank you for this gift? Will I ever see you again? Lao Tzu smiled back at him. Lao Tzu said, this gift is a dead thing too. In that respect, it is no different from the other books. Remember, you can make it come alive by putting what it says into actual practice. When you do that, you will see me in the Tao. The commander looked on as Lao Tzu receded from view. Neither one of them realized that the gift was destined to become a spiritual cornerstone, not just for the ancient Chinese, but for all mankind. Neither one realized that one of the most significant events in human history had just taken place. This day that started out seeming like a typical day at the Hangul Pass turned out to be not so typical after all. The end. So that was the legend behind the writing of the Tao Te Ching. There are many parts to the legend that we should look into in an analysis. First, Hangul Guan. The Hangul Pass was the western gate of the Zhou kingdom. In order to leave the Zhou kingdom, you have to pass one of the gates. And if you were heading out to Western lands, Hangu Guan would be that pass. As I mentioned, there are multiple versions of this legend. Some have been distorted. I would even say badly distorted. For instance, there is a version that says the commander at the pass threw Lao Tzu in jail and forced Lao Tzu to write the Tao Te Ching before releasing him. This is a highly unlikely version for a couple of reasons, for a couple of common sense reasons. It was based on the fact, this distortion was based on the fact that in ancient times, officials tended to dominate the people. However, Lao Tzu was not just anyone. He was the royal archivist, and at the time of the encounter, the commander of the pass had no idea that he was no longer that he had left the position. Therefore, for all he knew, Lao Tzu still commanded power and authority. That's number one. Number two, respect and reverence for the teacher, for the master, is as old as ancient culture of the Chinese itself, going back many more thousand years, even before the time of Lao Tzu. Just by the fact of being who he was, an accomplished scholar, a great teacher, Lao Tzu would naturally command respect, naturally, everywhere he went. He would not be thrown in jail and threatened with imprisonment unless he wrote the Tao Te Ching. As a student of the Tao, the commander was, of course, very respectful. And there are multiple conversations, multiple points from the conversation that he had with Lao Tzu that we should definitely pay attention to. They reflect on the teachings of the Tao that we should absorb. First, Lao Tzu practiced what he taught, did not wish to draw attention. Lao Tzu had, despite his status, despite his position, Lao Tzu had the practice in the Tao of humility. He did not draw attention to himself. He wanted to be treated just like everyone else that was passing through the gate. And he also did not claim to be wise. He did not accept the compliment that people say he taught the Tao with divine powers. And furthermore, when he talked about leaving behind everything to pursue freedom, that is another key point from the study of the Tao, is in recognizing the dynamic between attachments and freedom. More attachments, less freedom. Less attachments, more freedom. That's the way it works. Other points from the story that we should pay attention to, for instance, the Tao is not about knowledge. A common mistake back in those days, as well as in ancient times. Yet another thing to note in the background of the story is that this was before the invention of paper. That meant books, scrolls were rare, and they were not made of paper at all. They were two materials used for writing surface. One was silk, the other was bamboo slips. Basically, you cut open bamboo, you arrange them into vertical slips, you tie them together, and that forms a writing surface. Because they were rare, they were time-consuming to make, only the most wealthy and or powerful could have a collection of them. This was also why the Tao Te Ching was written to be so concise. Back in those days, the rarity of writing surface meant that you had to be very careful in choosing what you write on the writing surface. You have to pick and choose what you say carefully to not waste the little precious surface that you have. You have to automatically summarize everything you want to say, represent the most with the least. Then, another important point was about the Tao. The Tao didn't care if you were emperor, king, commoner, whatever. The Tao applied to all. And the Tao was not, as I mentioned, about the accumulation of knowledge. Book knowledge, as Zhuangzi said, was limited. All the ancient sages, Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, all agreed on this particular point. The pursuit of knowledge can actually take one further away from the Tao. If one were to be attached or obsess over the dead knowledge in books and not put them to use, one is essentially wasting time. Knowledge is meant to be applied, then they come alive. Knowledge comes alive only when we apply it to life. And then, lastly, as Lao Tzu was departing, he emphasized this very point. If you wish to partake in the wisdom of the Tao or Lao Tzu himself, all you really have to do is look at the Tao Te Ching, learn from it, and actually use what's in it. This story was drawn from the introduction of my translation. I know there are still many people who don't have this book, and I know I've never done a video or analysis on the story, so I very much appreciate the opportunity to do so today. This was the legend about the writing of the Tao Te Ching. Let me go to what I feel is the most important part of the introduction. The reason why we should study the Tao Te Ching. I would say that the major reason for studying the Tao is to understand your life journey. In my opinion, this understanding can be harder than it seems. So, for instance, I used to think of intelligence as the key for living a good life. If you are smart about it, life can be good. I have since learned that I was wrong. When I thought this, I was young and naive. And the reason why I say that I was wrong is because I have seen good people, smart people fail in life. Some of them a lot smarter than I am. So it seems that intelligence by itself doesn't guarantee anything. I observed more and learned through observation that it is wisdom, not intelligence, that was the key. One could be very smart and yet still lacking in wisdom. This realization came as a shock for me. So this brings up a difficult question for the younger version of me. How can I be wiser? How can I choose a good path in life out of many possible paths? And this is the question that I would put to you as well about your own life journey. First question, what was the journey that brought you here? Here we are, gathering together over this online medium. We are in this meeting, we are studying the Tao. What was the journey that brought you here? As you look back in time, looking at the past of your journey, what are some things you have learned from that journey? I tell people that I went through the school of hard knocks, and that's because I have done many, many things that were not smart or wise, and I had to learn from them. What are some things you wish you knew now that you know better, but perhaps not back then? So these are my questions for everyone to kind of reflect on the journey so far. Now that was the past. Let's turn in the other direction to talk about the future. Where are you going? Not physically, not like a road trip to some other place. Where are you going in life? What is your overall direction? Is there an overall direction? Or is it whatever happens to be the direction that you are currently facing? Or are you striking out in yet another random direction? What is that direction? What is your overall destination? Is there some sort of destination? Doesn't have to be the final destination, could be one destination among many. What are some stops along the way? What can you expect if you were to head in that particular direction for a particular destination? What are some stops that you can anticipate you will come across? Then, if you look at the image that I have in this slide, it's a path in the woods that splits off into two, going off in two different directions. What if you need to choose a path? And this gives rise to the overall question, when you consider the journey of life from a higher level and overall perspective, then you have to wonder, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of it all? What is the purpose of your existence? What is the meaning of your life? If you're thinking about these questions, then you are having the same thoughts that I did. Years ago, I read many books. Some of them contain some nuggets of wisdom, but none of them had a coherent overall philosophy that worked for me. I was lost. I was confused until I took a deeper look into the Tao Te Ching. Let me go back even further in time and share with everyone that I learned the Tao Te Ching starting from a rather young age as part of my study of classical Chinese in general. I always had an intuitive grasp for the Tao Te Ching. Somehow, I could easily understand ancient text, even the parts that seem to puzzle other people. Not only that, I could always explain the understanding in a simple way that made perfect sense, that resolved the perplexity for other people. I became proficient at it. However, I was perhaps too young to think about practical applications. For you see, it never occurred to me back in those days to apply the ancient teachings in everyday living. Never occurred to me until years later when I was searching for a direction in life, wondering what my destination is, wondering about the purpose, the meaning, and what would I do when I come upon a fork in the road. That's when the pieces started falling into place. I was very fortunate in that regard because I was able to learn from multiple masters from an authentic Tao tradition. There was one in particular, the Grand Master of this Tao tradition, who was especially influential in my life. I met him, I encountered the Grand Master when life for me was like this image that you see on the screen. Everything was murky. I felt as if I was moving forward in a fog. I could only see a little distance in front of me. The Grand Master, I found, was the very opposite. He was the embodiment of the Tao. In my opinion, he was like a living oracle because he just knew. He knew things he couldn't possibly know, as if he could see through the fog when most people, myself included, could not. I wasn't the only one who noticed this. People would always ask him, Grandmaster, how did you know? How could you tell? When he shared his insights with them about something, they would be amazed and they would ask him that question. And when they asked him, well, how did you know? He would always respond by saying, when you get to this level of Tao cultivation, you will see for yourself. And I wouldn't stop asking him the same question. So he said to me, he said, look at the people who seek divination or fortune telling by consulting the I Ching. They need to do that because they have no visibility into their own future. For them, the I Ching can be very accurate because it gives them a glimpse through the fog. Then the Grandmaster said, one of the remarkable things that happens when you study the Tao is that the I Ching becomes less and less accurate to forecast your fate. And this is for the simple reason that you gradually gain mastery over your own destiny. The Grandmaster passed away. I realized the best way for me to honor his memory was to continue my cultivation of the Tao, continue down the path he has set out for me. Over time, I saw the truth of his words. The more you study and cultivate, the clearer everything becomes. So now my goal is to share his message with everyone, as he shared the message with me. When you don't know the Tao, spiritually, you are in the fog, like this image. Things are blurry. You cannot see very far ahead. Visibility is lousy. You can't tell which path will be the better way to go in life. When that is the case, yeah, I can see people going to a fortune teller. Like the fortune teller seems to look a little further ahead. They tell you about bumps on the road. They can advise you on, hey, swerve left, swerve right, avoid bumps in the road, or slow down to reduce the impact. Of course, they're not accurate with someone who cultivates, because the more you refine your spirituality, the greater your clarity. Reading, reflection, reviewing your actions, meditation can all help. The fog lifts, and eventually you get to the level of the Grandmaster. You know what's ahead better than any fortune teller. You can pick and choose your path. You can pick and choose the best path. This is the level that I call becoming a destiny author, the author of your own destiny. You can write out what you want, or you can design what you want. You are the destiny architect. You can decide on your future. You can design it. Make it what you want it to be. That, my friends, is the reason I would offer to you. This is the ultimate reason why we should study the Tao Te Ching. This ends the introduction. Now, I believe we are ready to delve into chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching. As with all other chapters, this chapter has a Chinese title. It is Observe the Essence. 观妙章, 3 characters, left to right. The first character literally is the character for observe. Observation is the key activity and skill of the ancient sages. They learn by observing. The essence, 妙, the wonder. By observation, we can see it all, understand it all, have it all. Let's take a look at what Dao De Jing 1 actually says. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the origin of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of myriad things. Thus, constantly without desire, one observes its essence. Constantly with desire, one observes its manifestations. These two emerge together, but differ in name. The unity is said to be the mystery. Mystery of mysteries, the door to all wonders. This is the inaugural chapter, the beginning, the starting point of the Tao Te Ching. It can be divided in this way. 4 sections, 2 lines per section until we get to the final section, which contains 3 lines. And let me point out the similar characters, the repeating characters that help us identify the sections. First, we have these characters. These 3 characters repeat from line 1 to line 2. And You can see the translation on the right-hand side. 可 means can, and then not the eternal. And we'll talk more about that specific translation, when we do the line-by-line analysis. For now, just note that these repetitions don't go beyond line 2. In line 3, you don't see the same characters. You see a different kind of repetition with different characters, and let me highlight what those are. Line 3 and line 4, you have repetition in terms of the number of characters is the same, and then the second character is the same. And the meaning is the same. It means name. In line 3, when you combine it with the first character, it's without name or nameless. In line 4, combined with the first character, it means have name with name, the named. And then we have another repeating character, which is actually the apostrophe S. But if we change the order, the syntactic order of what's before and after, then we get to use of. And once again, these repetitions do not go beyond line 4. If you look at line 5 and 6, they don't have the same repeating characters at all. They have different repeating characters, and here's what they are. Can be a little bit tricky to see because they're offset by the character for thus. But if you were to move line 6 to the right a little bit, you can see that they actually line up. So we've got a character for constantly. And then we have a character for desire. You can see the translation on the right-hand side. One observes its, and then followed by either essence or manifestations. So just as we have rendered the character, the first character of line 6 is a repeat of the next to last character from line 1 and 2. There it is eternal. Here it's constantly. It is also possible to translate this as eternally without desire or eternally with desire. But in this case, it seems that constantly sounds better. So these repetitions do not go beyond line 6. In lines 7, 8, and 9, the final section, we've got different repetitions again. Between 7 and 8, we have one character in common. They are in different places. So contextually, the character in line 7 is translated as together, and the one in line 8, the first character in line 8, is translated as unity. Then we have the same character repeated 3 times, and you can see that it's always translated as a mystery. And this character gets mistranslated as darkness, but we can talk about that when we get to the line-by-line analysis. For now, let's go ahead and get to line 1 of the Tao Te Ching. The first line is important. It's Dao Ke Dao. So you see the pinyin romanization there. Dao is easier to sound. The second character there, it looks like it may be ki or k, but it's actually ke. So ke can be a little tricky for a native English speaker to sound out. Ke means can. Literally, It is the Tao that can be spoken. So the same character, Tao, it's repeated in the first position and the third position. The first Tao is used as a noun, the Tao, the path, or the way. The second occurrence, which is the third character, is a verb. It means to speak, to say, to talk. Now, because they are the same character, someone who does not know Chinese may assume that the verbal form of the way must be to walk, to travel, to go. In fact, that is not the case. This is not an instance where a character has multiple definitions. It's not that there's one definition for talk, say, speak, and then there's another one for walk, travel, go. In this case, the definitions of Tao has no walk, trotting, travel elements at all. It's kind of a guess or an assumption from someone who's trying to figure out the Chinese character. So now when we combine the above, we get the Tao that can be spoken. The first one is a noun. The second instance is a verb. So the mistranslation or the misunderstanding that I'm referring to is prevalent. The temptation is pretty strong. The temptation to assume the second Tao must have something to do with travel. So these are all the variations that people have tried because that was the assumption. So then it becomes the way that can be trodden, the way that can be overtrod, the way that can be walked, the way that may be traveled, the way that can be directed, the way that can be a guide. Notes that all of these have something to do with the act of traveling. Then at the level beyond this, when a Western scholar who doesn't know Chinese finally understands that the original has nothing to do with walking or traveling, then it's rather troublesome because the scholar would not know what it actually means. So then they'll use the way that can be weighed or the Tao that can be Taoed. This is an indication that they don't really know the actual definition, so it's a bit of a cop-out. Now, the better way to understand it, the accurate way, the actual way to understand is speaking, talking, discussing. The Tao that can be told, the Tao that can be talked about, the Tao that can be spoken of, the Tao that can be said, the Tao that can be expressed, the Tao that can be described, the Tao that may be discussed, the Tao that is the subject of discussion. These are better because all of these has something to do with talking, nothing to do with walking or going. Now, the reason why I devote a slide to this is because there really are people out there who struggle with the meaning of this. When they try to come to grips with the meaning of Dao Ke Dao, they have more misses than hits. This slide, because I've got the same number of entries under misunderstood as I have under better, it can give the impression that it's like 50-50 out there. In reality, what we have is more misses than hits. So there will also be people who think that it means the Tao that can be understood, the Tao that can be done, the Tao that can be named, the Tao that can be thought of, the Tao that can be defined to death. No. Dao Ke Dao just means the Tao that can be spoken, the Tao that can be talked about, the Tao that can be said, etc. I want to make sure everyone is armed with that bit of knowledge. This will help you as you continue your exploration of the Tao Te Ching. Continue on. Let's complete the first line with 非常道. 3 characters. They break down as the following. 非 means not. 常 means eternal. And then the last occurrence there of the Tao is just the Tao. The middle character, 常, means constant. That is the dictionary definition. But here, it is translated as eternal. Why is that? It's because the original character in the very first writing of the Dao De Jing was Heng, which means eternal, not Chang, which means constant. It got changed. Why? Because it was customary in ancient times to change the character in order to avoid accidentally invoking the name of the emperor. So several hundred years after the time of Lao Tzu, it was the time of the Han Dynasty, Han Cao. So one of the emperors several hundred years after the time of Lao Tzu, his name was Liu Heng. His name happened to be the same character. So in order to avoid accidentally invoking his name, scholars at that time changed the Heng character to Chang, but the original really was eternal. This gave archaeologists a way to date ancient manuscripts. For instance, if there is a new discovery of an ancient tomb and a very old copy of the Tao Te Ching is unearthed, it's probably on silk or bamboo. You can look at the first chapter and then you can get an approximate idea of its age. If it's Heng, eternal, then it's before the time of that particular emperor, which means that the age will be between 2500 to 2200 years old. If it's Chang, then it's sometime after this emperor, sometime after 2200 years ago. Now, as to why they felt it necessary to change, I would offer to everyone that human nature is exactly the same, East or West, ancient times or modern times. Whenever there was a concentration of power and authority, as was certainly the case with emperors, there would also be sycophants, that is, people who maximize their talents to flatter the ego of the person in power. So the emperor himself might not have cared or minded that his name was used in the original Tao Te Ching, but the sycophants around him would make a big deal out of it and say that it was absolutely forbidden and create a rule based on that. It is human nature. I think it actually highlights another reason why we should study the Tao Te Ching, and that is to understand human nature better. So now that we have gone through the first line of the Tao Te Ching, we are getting toward the end of our time together today. I'm going to jump to the summary to summarize what we have looked at today, at least the first part of it. So the first summary covers the first 4 lines. We have only gone through the first one. So when we talk about 道可道非常道, it is saying that the Tao that can be spoken, the Tao that we talk about, that's not the real Tao, the eternal, constant, actual Tao. The real Tao has to be applied more so than discussed. And this actually applies to everything. This applies to life. Life is an experience meant to be lived. Life is not something to be endlessly discussed and analyzed. The Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu would encourage all of us to get out there and live your life. Indeed, every possible activity in life is exactly like that. Doesn't do you any good to talk about it endlessly. You must actually do it. The Tao is the ultimate source. So this is something that we'll talk about more next time. But basically, you have the Tao within you. The Tao overall in the universe is the source of everything. What the ancient sages said was that we don't know much about this ultimate source. We're going to call it the Tao because it is the way of the universe to continuously create. By extension, because we're part of the Tao and the Tao is within us, it, in our lives, is the source of everything as well. It manifests as creativity. The power of universal creation manifests in you as the power of your personal creativity. It is up to us to come to grips with this power and use it to, as I said, better ourselves, live the life we were meant to live, and design the destiny that we want to have. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.